In the harsh wilderness of 1870s, Arizona Territory, Kiyah struggles against starvation and exile from his Apache tribe. Cast out for refusing to participate in raids against innocent settlers, he wanders the desert searching for redemption that seems impossible to find. When he hears the desperate cries of a drowning infant carried by the Colorado River's violent spring floods, every instinct tells him to keep walking. Saving a white child could mean his death if discovered. But Kiyah cannot ignore a life in danger. He plunges into the raging waters and pulls the baby to safety, only to discover a leather bag floating nearby. Inside lies something that will challenge everything he believes about honor, survival, and the bitter war between his people and the white settlers. The contents force him to choose between personal safety and a destiny that could unite two worlds or destroy them both. But what could be inside that bag that would make an exiled warrior risk everything he has left? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The eagle feather headband had been stripped from Kiyah's head 6 months ago, along with his name, his family, and everything that had defined him as a warrior of the Chiricahua Apache. The ceremonial feathers, earned through years of courage and service, now adorned another man's brow, while Kiyah wandered the desert as one already dead to his people. He could still feel the weight of Chief Nachi's words echoing across the tribal council fire. "You have shamed us all, Kiyah. A warrior who will not fight when ordered is no warrior at all." The old chief's face had been granite, unmoved by Kiyah's attempts to explain his choice, his refusal to participate in what he saw as the slaughter of innocents. The memory burned as fiercely now as it had that terrible morning when he had ridden toward the Wilson homestead with 20 other warriors, painted for war and hungry for vengeance against the white settlers who had been encroaching on traditional Apache hunting grounds. But when they crested the hill overlooking the small cabin, Kiyah had seen not enemies but a family, a man working in his garden, a woman hanging laundry, children playing with wooden toys in the dust. "These are not soldiers," he had said to War Chief Koshi's son, who led the raid. "These are not the ones who killed our brothers at Fort Apache. All whites are our enemies," came the reply. "All must pay for what their soldiers do to our people." Kiyah had watched the other warriors charge down the hillside, their war cries splitting the morning air like thunder. He had remained frozen on his horse, unable to move forward into what his heart told him was murder, unable to retreat and abandon his war brothers to face danger alone. In that moment of paralysis, he had lost everything. The raid had succeeded without his participation. The Wilson family lay buried now beneath desert stones, their cabin reduced to ash and memory. But Kiyah's refusal to join the killing had branded him as a coward in the eyes of his people, a warrior who had lost his courage when courage was needed most. His grandmother Nasha had been the only one to support his choice, though even she could not prevent his exile. "The spirits gave you a gentle heart in a time of war," she had whispered as the tribal council deliberated his fate. "This is not weakness, grandson. This is the burden of one who sees beyond the hatred that blinds others." But her wisdom could not save him from the consequences of his conscience. Chief Nasha had pronounced the sentence with ceremonial gravity. "You are dead to us, Kiyah. Your name will not be spoken around our fires. Your deeds will not be remembered in our songs. Go from this place and do not return, for if you do, we will make your death real as well as symbolic." The eagle feather headband had been the last thing they took from him, the sacred feathers that marked his status as a proven warrior. Without them, he was nobody. Not Apache, not white, not anything that either world would recognize or accept. For 6 months, he had wandered the harsh landscape between worlds, surviving on his knowledge of desert plants and hidden water sources, avoiding both Apache war parties and cavalry patrols that would kill him on sight. His clothes had worn thin, patched with scraps of leather and cloth, scavenged from abandoned camps. His body had grown lean and hard, sustained by roots and berries and the occasional rabbit caught in snares he crafted from memory. The loneliness was harder to bear than the hunger. Apache were not meant to live in solitude. They were tribal people, sustained by the bonds of family and clan as much as by food and water. Kiyah found himself talking to the desert wind, singing the old songs to keep his sanity intact, performing the morning rituals his grandmother had taught him, even though no one remained to witness his devotion to the old ways. His journey had brought him to the Colorado River during the season of melting snow, when the mountain runoff turned the normally placid water into a raging torrent that could sweep away unwary travelers. He had come seeking fish and fresh water, hoping to restore his failing strength before continuing south toward the Mexican border, where perhaps he might find a place among people who knew nothing of his shame. The river's voice had drawn him from his camp before dawn, promising sustenance and the ritual purification that Apache tradition demanded when a warrior sought to cleanse himself of dishonor. Water was sacred to his people, a gift from the spirits that could wash away the stains of failure and fear. But as Kiyah approached the riverbank in the gray light before sunrise, he heard something that stopped his heart. The desperate cries of a human infant being swept downstream by the flood-swollen current, a sound so piercing and helpless that it cut through all his careful plans for anonymity and survival. Standing at the water's edge with the mysterious cries growing fainter by the moment, Kiyah faced another choice that would define not just his immediate future, but the very nature of the man he was becoming in his exile from everything he had once called home. The woven baby blanket caught Kiyah's eye first, a masterwork of fine wool dyed in rich blues and whites, with intricate patterns that spoke of wealth and careful craftsmanship. No frontier family possessed such luxury. This blanket had come from back east, perhaps from one of the great cities where white women had time to create beautiful things instead of fighting daily for survival. The infant wrapped within its folds was perhaps 6 months old, small and helpless as the raging Colorado River carried both child and blanket toward certain death. The baby's cries pierced the dawn air with desperate intensity, a sound that bypassed Kiyah's rational mind and struck directly at instincts older than tribal politics or racial hatred. Every survival instinct screamed at him to turn away. An Apache warrior found with a white child would face immediate execution, no questions asked, no mercy shown. The cavalry patrols that regularly swept this territory shot Apache on sight, and discovering one with a kidnapped infant would only confirm their worst assumptions about savage raiders stealing white children for unspeakable purposes. But Kiyah's feet were already moving toward the water before his mind could catalogue all the reasons why rescue was impossible. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. The spirits test us not through the easy choices, grandson, but through the ones that cost us everything we think we want to keep. The river ran higher and faster than he had ever seen it, swollen with snowmelt from distant mountains and turned treacherous by spring storms that had dumped torrents of rain across the watershed. Debris swept past, uprooted trees, pieces of buildings, the carcasses of animals that had misjudged the water's power. The infant would be dead within minutes if the current carried it into the rocky rapids visible downstream. Kiyah shed his worn buckskin shirt and moccasins, knowing that any extra weight could drag him under in the powerful current. The river was cold enough to steal a man's strength in moments, and he would have perhaps one chance to reach the child before the water claimed them both. He waded into the shallows, feeling the current's immediate assault on his balance. The river bottom was treacherous with loose stones and hidden obstacles. One misstep would send him tumbling downstream as helplessly as the infant he hoped to save. The baby had drifted perhaps 50 yards downstream by the time Kiyah committed himself fully to the rescue. He dove forward into the main current, letting the river carry him while he angled toward the small bundle that represented either salvation or damnation, depending on who discovered them afterward. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs and causing his muscles to seize with shock. The current was stronger than he had anticipated, pulling him deeper and faster than swimming alone could have prepared him for. Debris struck him, a tree branch that scraped his ribs, a chunk of adobe that nearly knocked him unconscious. But his focus remained fixed on the infant, now close enough that he could see the child's face contorted with terror and exhaustion. The baby had stopped crying, either from cold or the simple lack of strength to continue protesting against impossible circumstances. Kiyah's fingertips brushed the blanket just as a submerged log rolled beneath them both. He grasped desperately, feeling the fine wool slide through his numb fingers before his other hand found purchase on the infant's clothing. The child was incredibly light, bird-fragile in his grip, but alive. He could feel the rapid flutter of a heartbeat against his palm. Swimming one-handed while protecting the infant proved nearly impossible in the violent current. Kiyah kicked toward shore with failing strength, his vision beginning to blur from cold and oxygen deprivation. The riverbank seemed impossibly distant, and he realized with growing despair that saving the child might simply mean they would die together instead of separately. Then his feet touched bottom in the shallows, and he staggered forward through knee-deep water toward a rocky outcrop that offered shelter from the current. The infant had gone completely limp in his arms, either unconscious from cold or worse. Kiyah crawled onto the rocks and immediately began the breathing techniques his grandmother had taught him for reviving those who had nearly drowned. The baby's skin had taken on a blue tinge that spoke of dangerous cold, but when Kiyah cleared water from the tiny mouth and pressed gently on the small chest, the infant coughed and began breathing more regularly. The cry that followed was weaker than before, but unmistakably alive. Only then did Kiyah notice the leather bag that had washed ashore nearby, a curious object that appeared to have been floating alongside the infant. The bag was well made and waterproof, with careful stitching that had protected its contents from the river's assault. It bore no identifying marks, but its quality matched the expensive blanket in suggesting that both child and bag had come from a family of considerable means. As he worked to warm the infant with his own body heat, Kiyah found himself studying the child's features. Definitely white, with pale skin and fine hair that would probably lighten to blonde when dry. The clothing beneath the blanket was equally fine, soft cotton garments that had never known the rough frontier life most settlers' children endured. This was no ordinary pioneer infant. The quality of the blanket, the expensive clothing, and the mysterious waterproof bag all suggested connections to military families or wealthy merchants, people who would have the resources to mount extensive search efforts for a missing child. The baby's breathing steadied as warmth returned to the small body. Kiyah found himself studying the infant's face, noting the button nose and the way tiny fingers curled around his larger ones when he offered them. For a moment, the child's eyes opened, startlingly blue against the pale skin, and seemed to focus on Kiyah's face with the intense curiosity of one meeting a stranger who might represent either safety or danger. In that instant of connection, Kiyah felt something shift inside his chest. This was not just a rescue anymore. It was a responsibility that would complicate every decision he made from this moment forward. The child would need care, protection, and eventually return to its own people. But first, both of them needed to survive the immediate aftermath of choices that had seemed impossible just moments before. The leather bag sat nearby, its contents unknown but somehow significant. Something about its presence alongside the infant suggested that both had been together when they entered the water, that whatever had caused their near drowning had involved more than simple accident. Kiyah reached for the bag with one hand while continuing to warm the infant with the other, sensing that its contents might hold answers to questions he had not yet learned to ask. The official military orders bore the seal of the United States Cavalry and were signed by Colonel William Harrison, commanding officer of Fort Whipple. As Kiyah unfolded the waterlogged but still legible documents, his hands began to tremble, not from cold, but from the magnitude of what he was reading. Operation Desert Sweep, the header declared in bold military script. coordinated campaign for the final pacification of hostile Apache elements in Arizona territory. The papers contained detailed maps showing the locations of every known Apache settlement, winter camps, and seasonal gathering places. Red X marks indicated targets for simultaneous attack. Troop movement schedules outlined a coordinated assault planned for the coming week, designed to strike multiple Apache communities at once, preventing any from warning the others or providing mutual aid. Kiyah's own tribe's winter camp was marked with a particularly bold red X, along with notations estimating population, defensive capabilities, and expected resistance levels. The clinical military language described his people as if they were insects to be exterminated rather than human beings fighting for their homeland. But the most chilling document was a memorandum marked confidential orders regarding civilian casualties. The language was bureaucratic, but unmistakable in its intent. No distinction shall be made between combatant and non-combatant Apache. Complete elimination of hostile populations is authorized and encouraged to prevent future uprising and ensure permanent pacification of the territory. This was not a military operation, it was a planned genocide. The cavalry intended to murder every Apache man, woman, and child they could find, regardless of age, guilt, or involvement in any hostile activities. The orders specifically mentioned that the elimination of Apache children will prevent the regeneration of hostile forces in future years. Kiyah's stomach churned as he read tactical notes describing how to maximize casualties while minimizing military losses. The documents detailed plans for surrounding camps at dawn, setting fire to wickiups with families still inside, and pursuing any who might escape into the desert. The infant in his arms stirred and made small crying sounds, drawing Kiyah's attention back to immediate concerns. As he adjusted the blanket around the child, he noticed something he had missed before. A small brass button on the baby's shirt bore the insignia of Fort Whipple. This was no ordinary settler's child. This infant belonged to someone within the military command structure, possibly to the very officers planning the massacre of Kiyah's people. More documents revealed the scope of the conspiracy. Letters between various post commanders showed that similar operations were planned across the entire Southwest, a coordinated effort to solve what they called the Apache problem once and for all. Supply lists included extra ammunition, body disposal equipment, and provisions for extended field operations, designed to hunt down any survivors who might escape the initial attacks. But among the damning military correspondence, Kiyah found something unexpected, a personal letter written in a woman's careful handwriting. The paper was expensive stationery, and the message was addressed to someone named Nasha in care of the Cherikawa Apache Tribal Council. "My dear Nasha," the letter began, "I pray this warning reaches you in time. My husband commands the soldiers who plan to attack your people. I have seen their orders, and I cannot remain silent while innocent families are murdered in their sleep. The attack comes with the new moon. You must take your people and flee to the mountains where the soldiers cannot follow with their wagons and cannons." The letter was signed Eleanor Harrison and dated just 3 days ago. Kiyah stared at the signature with growing understanding. This woman, Eleanor Harrison, was married to Colonel Harrison, the man who had signed the extermination orders. She had risked her own life and the safety of her family to warn his people of the coming slaughter. The waterproof bag, the presence of military documents, the infant with Fort Whipple insignia, it all pointed to a tragedy within the Harrison family. Someone had been carrying these documents as intelligence to warn the Apache. Eleanor Harrison, most likely, attempting to deliver her warning personally when weather or other circumstances had prevented normal communication. But something had gone wrong. The bag and baby had ended up in the floodwaters, suggesting an accident or attack that had claimed the woman's life while trying to save his people from massacre. The infant he held was not just any military officer's child. This was Colonel Harrison's own grandchild, the son or daughter of the woman who had died trying to prevent the genocide of the Apache nation. The cruel irony struck Kiyah like a physical blow. He held in his arms the grandchild of the man planning to murder every Apache in the territory, while that same child's mother had sacrificed her life to prevent those very murders. His grandmother's name in the letter confirmed Eleanor Harrison's sincerity. Nasha was known among the Apache as a wise woman and healer, someone outsiders occasionally approached for help or guidance. Eleanor Harrison had somehow learned of his grandmother's reputation and had trusted her with intelligence that could save hundreds of Apache lives, but the warning would never reach its intended recipient unless Kiyah carried it there himself. The documents in his hands represented the difference between survival and extinction for his people. Every Apache settlement marked on the military maps would be destroyed unless someone warned them to flee before the coordinated attacks began. The infant gurgled softly, blue eyes focusing on Kiyah's face with the trusting expression of one who instinctively recognizes a protector. This child, Colonel Harrison's grandchild, had become an unwitting participant in events that would determine the fate of two peoples locked in seemingly endless conflict. Kiyah looked from the military documents to the infant's peaceful face, understanding that he held more than a rescued child in his arms. He held the power to save his people from slaughter, but only if he could reach them in time with Eleanor Harrison's warning. Yet carrying the colonel's grandchild into Apache territory would complicate everything, creating impossible choices between protecting the innocent child and fulfilling his obligation to warn his people of approaching doom. The leather bag had indeed changed everything, just as some inner voice had warned him when he first pulled it from the river. Inside lay not just documents, but destiny, the chance to transform his exile from shame into salvation, his wandering from purposeless to vital. But the price of that transformation might be higher than even his grandmother's wisdom had prepared him to pay. The sun climbed higher over the Colorado River as Kiyah sat with the rescued child, and the terrible knowledge that would reshape the immediate future of everyone he had ever loved or fought against. Time was running out, and every moment of delay brought his people closer to extinction. Yet abandoning the infant meant condemning an innocent child to almost certain death, the very kind of moral compromise that had led to his exile in the first place. His grandmother's voice seemed to whisper across the desert wind, "The spirits test us not through easy choices, grandson, but through the ones that cost us everything we think we want to keep." Now he understood the full meaning of her prophecy about the choice that would define his path forever. Kiyah's medicine pouch contained the sacred items his grandmother had given him before his exile: dried herbs for healing, a piece of turquoise for protection, and a small vial of blessed water from the sacred springs where Apache mothers had brought their children for generations. Now these traditional remedies would have to sustain a white infant whose survival depended entirely on ancient Apache wisdom. The baby's immediate needs were overwhelming. Without proper milk, the child would weaken and die within days. Kiyah searched his memory for his grandmother's teachings about caring for orphaned infants, knowledge he had never expected to use under such desperate circumstances. Near the riverbank, he found what he sought, a stand of Palo Verde trees whose inner bark could be processed into a nutritious paste. Apache mothers had used this emergency food source for centuries when nursing was impossible. He carefully scraped the soft inner bark with his knife, mixing it with river water to create a thin gruel that might keep the infant alive until he could find better alternatives. The baby accepted the makeshift formula reluctantly, fussing and spitting before hunger finally overcame instinctive rejection of the unfamiliar taste. Kiyah fed the child drop by drop, using a piece of soft leather as a crude nipple, patient with the slow process that represented the difference between life and death. Creating shelter posed another challenge. The infant needed protection from the desert's temperature extremes, but any permanent structure would advertise their presence to passing patrols. Using his knowledge of Apache survival techniques, Kiyah constructed a lean-to shelter against a rocky outcrop, positioned to be invisible from the main travel routes, while providing access to water and escape routes if discovery threatened. The fine baby blanket became the foundation of a nest designed to retain body heat while allowing air circulation. Kiyah lined the shelter with dried grass and soft plant fibers, creating an environment that would protect the fragile child from the harsh realities of desert survival. As he worked, the infant watched him with bright, curious eyes that seemed to study his every movement. The child showed no fear of his Apache features or clothing, accepting his care with the trusting innocence of one too young to understand the prejudices that made their situation so dangerous. Kiyah found himself talking to the baby in soft Apache, describing his activities and sharing the ancient songs his grandmother had sung to soothe frightened children. The infant seemed calmed by his voice, responding to the gentle rhythms of a language that had comforted Apache children for countless generations. "Little one," he murmured in Apache, while adjusting the child's blankets, "you have chosen a hard path for your first adventure in this world. Your grandfather seeks to destroy my people, yet here you lie safe in Apache arms, depending on the very hands he would have killed without mercy." The irony of the situation struck him repeatedly as he tended to the child's needs. This infant represented everything his exile had been about, the protection of innocent life regardless of race or politics. Yet caring for Colonel Harrison's grandchild might prevent him from warning his own people about the planned massacre, creating a moral dilemma that seemed impossible to resolve. His attachment to the child grew with each passing hour. The infant's helplessness awakened protective instincts that transcended tribal loyalty or personal safety. When the baby cried, Kiyah felt genuine distress. When the small fingers wrapped around his larger ones, he experienced a connection that reminded him of his own childhood and the Apache values of cherishing and protecting the young. But practical concerns demanded constant attention. The child needed regular feeding, frequent cleaning, and protection from insects, sun, and cold. Every task required improvisation, using materials and techniques developed for adult survival rather than infant care. The responsibility exhausted Kiyah, both physically and emotionally, adding to the strain of constant vigilance against discovery. On the second day, distant dust clouds announced the presence of cavalry patrols searching the area. Kiyah watched from concealment as soldiers methodically worked their way along the river, clearly looking for something or someone. Their search pattern suggested they knew approximately where to look, probably following reports from scouts or friendly Indians who had observed unusual activity near the water. The baby chose that moment to begin crying. Not the quiet fussing that Kiyah had learned to manage, but the full-throated wailing of an infant who had reached the limits of patience with unfamiliar food and uncomfortable conditions. The sound carried clearly across the desert stillness, potentially audible to the searching soldiers. Kiyah pressed the child gently against his chest, using his body to muffle the cries while rocking back and forth in the rhythm his grandmother had taught him for calming distressed infants. He hummed softly in Apache, praying that maternal instincts might transcend cultural boundaries and soothe the frightened child. The soldiers passed within 100 yards of their shelter, close enough that Kiyah could hear their conversation about the missing child and the substantial reward being offered for information leading to recovery. One trooper mentioned that Colonel Harrison had promised promotions and bonuses for anyone who found his grandson alive and unharmed. After the patrol disappeared over the eastern hills, Kiyah sat holding the now quiet infant while contemplating the magnitude of the choice before him. Time was running out for warning his people. The military documents indicated the coordinated attacks would begin with the new moon, now only 4 days away. But abandoning the baby meant condemning an innocent child to certain death, violating every principle his grandmother had taught him about the sacred nature of life. As evening approached, he made a decision that would complicate everything, but felt morally unavoidable. He would take the infant with him toward Apache territory, hoping to find a way to deliver both the child and the warning to their respective destinations. It was a desperate plan that satisfied neither obligation completely, but it was the only path that honored his grandmother's teachings about protecting innocent life while serving his people's desperate need for survival. The medicine pouch at his belt seemed heavier as he prepared for the journey ahead, weighted not just with sacred objects, but with the responsibility of choices that would determine whether his exile led to redemption or to the destruction of everything he had ever loved. The infant slept peacefully in his arms, trusting him completely with a life that had become more precious than his own survival and more complicated than his worst nightmares had ever imagined possible. The broken cavalry saber lay half buried in sand beside the remnants of what had once been a supply wagon, its blade snapped cleanly in half, and its brass hilt blackened by fire. Kiyah studied the ambush site with the practiced eye of a warrior, reading the story written in scattered bones, burned wood, and blood-stained earth. The attack had happened perhaps a week ago, judging by the condition of the remains and the scavenger tracks around the scattered supplies. Apache warriors had struck a small cavalry patrol here, probably catching them in the narrow canyon, where escape was impossible and cover minimal. The broken saber belonged to an officer. The quality of its craftsmanship and decorative engravings spoke of someone with rank and resources. But what troubled Kiyah was the thoroughness of the destruction. Every wagon had been burned, every horse killed or driven off, every piece of useful equipment either taken or destroyed. This level of systematic devastation suggested more than a simple raid for supplies. It spoke of rage, of warriors who had left nothing behind that might be of use to their enemies. The infant strapped to his chest stirred restlessly, perhaps sensing his tension as he examined the battlefield. 3 days of travel had established a routine between them, the child accepting his makeshift care, while he navigated terrain that grew more dangerous with each mile toward Apache territory. Feeding remained the greatest challenge. The Palo Verde bark mixture sustained the infant but barely, and Kiyah could see the child losing weight despite his efforts. Soon he would need to find a more reliable source of nutrition, which meant either capturing a goat or horse mare for milk, or finding Apache women who might nurse the child. Both options carried enormous risks given his status as an exile and the infant's obvious white heritage. The broken saber reminded him that the desert had become a battlefield where both sides showed little mercy. Recent skirmishes between Apache raiders and cavalry patrols had escalated beyond traditional patterns of warfare into something approaching mutual extermination. Each attack brought retaliation, each retaliation invited escalation, until the cycle of violence seemed to feed on itself without regard for innocent casualties. Kiyah's knowledge of safe routes and hidden water sources proved essential for avoiding detection while making steady progress toward his people's winter camps. He traveled mostly at night, using star navigation his father had taught him, covering ground in darkness while resting during daylight hours in carefully chosen hiding places. The infant adapted surprisingly well to their nocturnal schedule, sleeping during the heat of day and remaining relatively quiet during night travel. Kiyah fashioned a carrying sling from his spare clothing, positioning the child against his chest where body heat would provide warmth, and his heartbeat might offer comfort during the long hours of walking. On their 4th day of travel, they encountered other Apache, a scouting party from one of the northern bands that Kiyah didn't immediately recognize. He approached their camp cautiously, using traditional signals to identify himself as a fellow Apache rather than an enemy infiltrator. The scout's reaction to his appearance was complicated by his exile status and the obvious presence of a white infant. Kiyah, the senior scout, recognized Kiyah's face despite the months that had passed since his banishment from tribal society. Kiyah, who was cast out, Kiyah said formally, using the ritual language for addressing the dead. "Why do you carry white child into Apache lands? Do you bring more trouble to people who have already forgotten your name? Kiyah explained his circumstances carefully, emphasizing the military documents and their intelligence value, while downplaying his personal attachment to the infant. The scouts examined Eleanor Harrison's warning letter with growing alarm, recognizing the detailed accuracy of the military maps and the implications of coordinated attacks on multiple Apache settlements. If this white woman speaks truth, Goyle said, after studying the documents, then death comes for all our people in 3 days. We must carry this warning to the council fires immediately. The scouts offered to take the military intelligence to the tribal leaders, relieving Kiyah of the burden of entering territory where his exile made him unwelcome. But they refused to accept responsibility for the white infant, viewing the child as potential source of disaster for any Apache caught caring for a cavalry officer's grandchild. You saved this child. You must decide its fate, Goyle declared. Apache cannot be found with white baby when soldiers come searching. Better you kill it now with mercy than let it bring death to innocent families. The brutal practicality of the suggestion struck Kiyah like a physical blow. These scouts saw the infant purely as a tactical problem to be solved with minimum risk to Apache lives. They had no understanding of his growing attachment to the child, no appreciation for the moral complexity that made simple solutions impossible. As the scouts prepared to leave with the military documents, Kiyah faced another crossroads in his journey toward an uncertain redemption. The intelligence about the planned massacre would reach his people whether he continued north or not. His obligation to warn the Apache had been fulfilled through these intermediaries, but the infant's fate remained his responsibility alone. Continuing toward Apache territory with Colonel Harrison's grandchild would endanger any tribe that showed them hospitality. Yet abandoning the child meant certain death for an innocent whose only crime was being born into the wrong family during a time of war. The broken cavalry saber caught the afternoon sunlight as Kiyah contemplated choices that seemed to offer no moral resolution. Eleanor Harrison had died trying to prevent genocide, leaving her child in the care of an exiled Apache warrior who now understood the true cost of her sacrifice. The infant looked up at him with trusting blue eyes, unaware that its survival depended on decisions that could determine the fate of two peoples locked in seemingly endless conflict. Kiyah touched his grandmother's medicine pouch for strength, knowing that whatever choice he made would define not just his own redemption, but the meaning of honor itself, in a world where simple survival had become the highest moral achievement most people dared attempt. The desert wind carried the scent of distant rain as he shouldered his pack and prepared to continue a journey that had become as much about discovering his own character as about warning his people or protecting an innocent child from the consequences of choices made by others, long before either of them had been born. The smoke signal mirror caught the morning sun and flashed the ancient Apache code across the desert valley. 3 short flashes, pause, 3 long flashes, pause, 3 short again. The pattern identified Kiyah as Apache rather than enemy, though his exile status complicated the traditional protocols for approaching tribal territory. From his position on the ridge overlooking the winter camp, Kiyah could see his people preparing for the day's activities. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children played between the wickiups, and women tended gardens that had provided sustenance through the harsh months. All of this would be destroyed in 2 days, unless the warning he had already sent ahead through Goyle's scouts had been believed and acted upon. The infant in his arms had grown noticeably weaker during their journey, despite his constant efforts to provide adequate nutrition. The child's cries had become feebler, and the blue eyes that had once focused on his face with bright curiosity now seemed distant and unfocused. Time was running out for both the baby's survival and his people's chance to escape the planned massacre. Nade Alicious, his younger brother, emerged from the tree line below, with 2 tribal warriors flanking him. Even from a distance, Kiyah could see the conflict in his brother's posture, joy at seeing him alive warring with the duty to treat an exile as one already dead to the tribe. Brother who has no name, Nelish is called in the formal tone required. When addressing the banished, why do you approach the fires of the living when your spirit walks already in the land of shadows? The ritual words stung, even though Kiyah understood their necessity. Apache law demanded that exiles be treated as deceased, their names unspoken, their presence unwelcome among those who still belong to the tribal family. But beneath the formal rejection, he heard genuine emotion in his brother's voice. "I bring intelligence that may save our people from destruction," Kiyah replied, also using the ceremonial language that created distance between their personal relationship and their public roles. "The warning has been sent ahead through Goyal scouts, but I come to ensure the council understands the urgency." National gestured toward the infant visible in Kiyah's carrying sling. "And why do you bring white child to Apache fires? Do you seek to compound the shame that led to your casting out?" Kiyah explained the circumstances of the rescue and the child's connection to the military intelligence, carefully presenting the facts without revealing his deep emotional attachment to the infant. The warriors listening to his account exchanged significant glances when he described Eleanor Harrison's sacrifice and the military documents she had died trying to deliver. "The woman who wrote the warning, she knew Grandmother Nasha's name," Kiyah concluded. "She trusted our grandmother with intelligence that could save hundreds of Apache lives. This child is all that remains of her courage." Nasha's expression shifted from formal hostility towards something more complex as he absorbed the full implications of his brother's story. "Grandmother has called for council meeting to discuss the intelligence you sent through the scouts. The documents convince some elders, but others suspect trap by military leaders who seek to drive us from good winter camps into desert, where we can be hunted more easily." The tribal council's skepticism frustrated but didn't surprise Kiyah. Apache leaders had learned to distrust any intelligence that seemed too convenient or too detailed, especially when it came from questionable sources. His exile status would complicate their deliberations, making some elders reluctant to accept information delivered by one officially declared dead to the tribe. "What does grandmother say?" Kiyah asked, knowing that Nasha's opinion would carry enormous weight in tribal decisions. "She remembers the white woman who sought her wisdom many seasons ago, asking about Apache ways of peace and healing. Grandmother believes the warning comes from true heart, not from military deception." The infant stirred weakly in Kiyah's arms, making small sounds that drew the attention of the tribal warriors. One of them, Chais the younger, studied the child with the calculating gaze of someone assessing potential threats and opportunities. "White baby with Apache warrior creates questions among soldiers," Chais observed. "They think we steal their children. They attack with more fury. Better we return child to white people, show Apache honor in protecting their young." The practical wisdom of the suggestion struck Kiyah immediately, though it meant separation from the child he had grown to care for as his own. Returning Colonel Harrison's grandchild could demonstrate Apache intentions while potentially reducing the military's motivation for revenge attacks. "The child grows weak," Kiyah admitted. "Without proper milk and care, death comes soon. Apache women with nursing babies could save this life, but only if tribal law permits such mercy." Nalnish looked toward the camp, where preparations for evacuation were already beginning based on the intelligence Goyal had delivered. "Council meets at sunset to decide final response to warning. If you speak truth about military plans, our people owe you debt that transcends your exile status." The acknowledgement felt like the first step toward possible redemption, though Kiyah understood that saving his people from massacre might not restore his place among them. Apache law was rigid about exile, and exceptions were rarely made even for extraordinary circumstances. As they spoke, an elderly woman emerged from the largest wickiup in the camp center. Even at a distance, Kiyah recognized his grandmother's distinctive gait and the way she carried her medicine bundle. Nasha had served as the tribe's principal healer and spiritual advisor for more than 30 years, her wisdom guiding decisions about war, peace, and survival. Grandmother calls for you, Nalanish said with surprise evident in his voice. She breaks tradition by acknowledging one who has been cast out. Kiyah descended toward the camp with growing apprehension about the reception awaiting him. Nasha's willingness to violate tribal law by meeting with him suggested either desperate circumstances or a spiritual insight that transcended ordinary social restrictions. The infant's weight seemed to grow heavier with each step as Kiyah approached the confrontation that would determine not only his own fate, but the future of the child whose survival had become intertwined with his quest for redemption. The smoke signal mirror remained tucked in his pack, its polished surface reflecting possibilities that ranged from restoration to final banishment from the only world he had ever known. The council fire was being prepared for the evening's deliberations, its smoke rising straight into the still air like prayers seeking divine guidance for choices that would determine whether the Apache nation survived the coordinated assault planned by their enemies. Eleanor Harrison's sacrifice would be meaningless unless the tribal leaders found courage to abandon their traditional winter camps and seek safety in the mountains where cavalry columns could not follow. As Kiyah approached his grandmother's wickiup with the weakening infant in his arms, he realized that the next few hours would determine whether his exile had been meaningless suffering or the necessary preparation for a moment when his people needed exactly the kind of moral clarity that had led to his banishment in the first place. The sacred peace pipe passed from hand to hand around the council fire, its carved stone bowl glowing red in the firelight as each elder took a ceremonial draw and considered the gravity of Kiyah's intelligence. Chief Naish held the pipe last, his weathered face impassive as he studied the military documents spread on a blanket between them. Kiyah sat outside the formal circle, his exile status preventing full participation in tribal deliberations, despite being the source of information that could save their lives. The infant lay quietly in his lap, wrapped in the fine blanket that had become their shared protection against the desert's harsh realities. "The documents speak truth," Nashta declared, her voice carrying the authority of one whose spiritual insights had guided the tribe through previous crises. "The white woman who brought this warning paid with her life to protect Apache children from soldiers who see no difference between warrior and infant." Cochise the younger examined the military maps more closely, noting details that confirmed his own observations of recent cavalry movements. "Troop positions match what our scouts report. Supply wagons moving toward staging areas, extra ammunition delivered to forward posts. All signs point toward large operation planned for New Moon." The evidence was overwhelming, but Chief Natch remained cautious about decisions that would uproot the entire tribe from winter camps that provided shelter and proximity to cached food supplies. "If we flee to the mountains as these papers suggest, many elders and children may die from cold and hunger. We trade certain death from soldiers for possible death from winter." The brutal calculation reflected the impossible choices facing Apache leaders who had watched their people steadily pushed from traditional lands into increasingly marginal territories. Every decision carried mortal consequences, and mistakes meant tribal extinction rather than mere hardship. War Chief Geronimo spoke from his position beside the fire, his scarred face reflecting decades of conflict with white settlers and soldiers. "Better to die fighting in the mountains than sleeping in our beds while soldiers burn our families alive. The military documents promise no mercy for women or children. This is not war, it is extermination." The infant in Kiyah's arms began crying weakly, the sound drawing attention from the assembled elders who had been treating the child as an unwelcome complication rather than a life requiring protection. Maria Flores, a woman who had lost her own baby to cavalry bullets 2 months earlier, looked at the struggling infant with visible emotion. "The child grows weak," she observed. "Without mother's milk, death comes soon." Nasha studied her grandson and the infant he had risked everything to save, seeing in their connection something that transcended the tribal laws about exile and racial boundaries. "This white child lives because Apache warrior chose protection over safety."
The spirits work through such choices to teach us about honor that goes beyond tribe or race. Chief Nich raised the peace pipe toward the star-filled sky, offering prayers for wisdom before announcing the council's decision. We accept the intelligence and prepare for immediate evacuation to the mountain strongholds. All families will begin moving at first light, taking only what can be carried quickly. The formal acceptance of Kiyah's warning represented vindication of his sacrifice, though it came at enormous cost to tribal stability and survival prospects. Hundreds of Apache would abandon their winter camps based on intelligence he had delivered, trusting their lives to his judgment and Eleanor Harrison's courage. The one who brought warning has served his people despite exile, Nasha continued, her words carefully chosen to honor Kiyah's contribution while respecting tribal law. The council recognizes this service and offers token of appreciation. She lifted the ceremonial peace pipe and extended it toward Kiyah, a gesture that acknowledged his value to the tribe without formally reversing his banishment. The pipe represented recognition of his honor and sacrifice, though not restoration to full tribal membership. Kiyah accepted the sacred object with hands that trembled from emotion more than exhaustion. I ask only that the child be cared for by those who can preserve its life. This infant deserves chance to grow and learn, regardless of the hatred between our peoples. Maria Flores stepped forward without waiting for formal permission from the tribal leaders. I will nurse the white child as my own. Apache way is to protect all children, not just those born to our blood. Her offer represented extraordinary generosity given her recent loss and the potential complications of caring for a cavalry officer's grandchild during a period of intensified conflict. But Apache traditions about child welfare transcended political considerations, and her decision received immediate approval from the assembled elders. The transfer of the infant from Kiyah's arms to Maria's care felt like amputation of part of his soul. The child he had rescued, protected, and grown to love would continue living, but their bond would be severed by circumstances beyond either of their control. The white child will know Apache ways and Apache honor, Maria promised. When soldiers come seeking their lost one, they will find a child raised with love instead of hatred. The irony of Colonel Harrison's grandchild being raised by Apache parents struck Kiyah as either cosmic justice or elaborate tragedy, depending on how future events unfolded. The infant who had nearly drowned in the Colorado River would now be saved by the very people his grandfather sought to exterminate. As the council meeting concluded and tribal families began preparations for evacuation, Kiyah faced the reality of renewed exile from the only world he had ever known. His service to the tribe had been acknowledged, but not rewarded with restoration of membership. He remained officially dead to his people, though now he carried their gratitude along with their rejection. Now Lish approached him as the council fire burned lower, offering supplies and guidance for the journey ahead. Grandmother says, your path leads beyond Apache lands now. The warning has been delivered. The child will be protected, but your destiny lies in directions not yet revealed. The prospect of continued wandering exhausted Kiyah, more than physical hardship or emotional loss. He had hoped that saving his people from massacre might restore his place among them, but Apache law remained rigid about exile regardless of extraordinary circumstances. Where does an Apache go when he belongs neither to his own people, nor to the white world that considers him an enemy? Kiyah asked his brother. Now Nish handed him the peace pipe. Nasser gifted its carved surface warm from the sacred fire, and Skard gifted its carved surface warm from the sacred fire, and smooth from generations of ceremonial use. Perhaps you go where the spirits guide those who must build, guide those who must build bridges between where the spirits guide those who must build bridges between where the spirits guide those who must build bridges between worlds that reach to see their common humanity.
The dawn sky was beginning to lighten as Kiyah prepared to leave the camp where his people were frantically preparing for evacuation to mountain strongholds. His mission had succeeded beyond his hopes. The warning would save hundreds of Apache lives, but the personal cost felt almost unbearable as he faced a future without family, tribe, or clear purpose, beyond simple survival. The bloodhound collar lay abandoned beside a dried-up waterhole, its leather still bearing the scent marks of the military tracking dog that had worn it during the intensive search for Colonel Harrison's missing grandson. The brass nameplate read, "Sergeant," and the worn leather spoke of years of faithful service before whatever had separated dog from handler in this remote stretch of Arizona desert. Major William Harrison stared at the collar with the hollow-eyed intensity of a man who had not slept properly in weeks. His grandson had been missing for nearly a month now, vanished during the flash flood that had claimed his daughter Eleanor's life while she was traveling to deliver medical supplies to Apache families. The official story was that Eleanor had been performing charitable work when the storm struck, but Harrison knew the truth was far more complicated. Eleanor's betrayal still burned in his chest like an infected wound. His own daughter had stolen military intelligence from his personal files, planning to warn the Apache tribes about Operation Desert Sweep before the coordinated attacks could eliminate the Apache threat once and for all. Her misguided humanitarian impulses had cost her life and put his grandson in mortal danger among savages who would show no mercy to a white child. "Sir," Lieutenant Collins approached with the deference required when addressing a superior officer consumed by grief and rage. "The tracking teams report losing the trail again near the Colorado River crossing. The Apache who took your grandson knows this terrain better than our best scouts." Harrison crushed the bloodhound collar in his fist, metal and leather creaking under pressure that reflected his desperate frustration with the manhunt's lack of progress. How does one Apache warrior evade 50 cavalry soldiers, professional trackers, and trained dogs for 3 weeks? The question carried implications that went beyond tactical concerns. If a single Apache could outmaneuver the Army's best efforts, what did that suggest about their chances in the larger campaign to pacify the territory? Harrison's reputation and career prospects depended on successfully completing Operation Desert Sweep, but his personal obsession with recovering his grandson was consuming resources needed for the broader military objectives. Captain Reynolds spread tracking maps across the makeshift command table they had established at the waterhole. Red pins marked confirmed sightings of the Apache warrior. Blue pins indicated possible tracks or signs, and black pins showed locations where search teams had found nothing but false leads and wasted effort. "The pattern suggests he's moving north toward Apache tribal areas," Reynolds observed, tracing the most likely route with his finger, "but he's taking an indirect path, probably to avoid our patrols and throw off the tracking dogs." Harrison studied the map with the systematic attention he brought to all military problems, forcing his personal emotions aside to focus on tactical realities. The Apache's route showed sophisticated knowledge of terrain, water sources, and military patrol patterns. This was no ordinary warrior. This was someone with exceptional survival skills and strategic thinking. "What do we know about the Apache who took my grandson?" Reynolds consulted his intelligence notes, compiled from various sources, including friendly Apache scouts and captured prisoners. The descriptions are consistent. A warrior in his 30s, traveling alone, showing signs of extended desert survival. Some reports suggest he might be an exile from his own tribe, which would explain his isolated status. The possibility that an outcast Apache had taken his grandson struck Harrison as either encouraging or ominous, depending on the warrior's motivations. An exile might be more willing to negotiate for supplies or safe passage, or he might be desperate enough to use the child as protection against military pursuit. Exiled for what? Harrison demanded, sensing that understanding the Apache's circumstances might provide tactical advantages in the ongoing pursuit. "The reports are unclear, sir. Apache tribes don't discuss internal politics with outsiders. But if he's been cast out, it might mean he violated their codes about warfare or killed someone important." Harrison absorbed this intelligence while considering its implications for his grandson's safety. An Apache warrior exiled for excessive violence might view a white child as either valuable hostage or expendable burden, depending on circumstances. But a warrior exiled for showing mercy might actually protect the boy from harm, creating unexpected opportunities for negotiation. The sound of approaching horses announced the arrival of additional search teams returning from their assigned sectors. Sergeant Murphy dismounted from a lathered horse and approached with the weary expression of someone delivering another report of failure. "No sign in the northern quadrant, sir, but we did find evidence of Apache tribal movement, large groups heading toward mountain strongholds with pack animals and children. Looks like they're abandoning their winter camps." The intelligence struck Harrison like a physical blow. If the Apache tribes were evacuating to mountain strongholds, it could only mean they had learned about Operation Desert Sweep through military intelligence leaks. The coordinated attacks planned for the new moon would find empty camps instead of the concentrated populations needed to achieve decisive results. How could they know? Harrison whispered, though he already suspected the answer. Eleanor's stolen documents had contained detailed information about troop movements, target locations, and attack timelines. If those papers had reached Apache leaders, the entire operation would have to be reconsidered. Lieutenant Collins studied his commander's expression with growing concern about the major's mental state. "Sir, should we proceed with the scheduled operations despite enemy preparation?" Harrison faced the collapse of months of planning and the likelihood of career-ending failure. Operation Desert Sweep had been designed to solve the Apache problem permanently through coordinated surprise attacks. If the tribes had advance warning and prepared defensive positions in mountainous terrain, the cavalry's advantages in mobility and firepower would be neutralized. "Send word to all post commanders," Harrison ordered through gritted teeth. "Operation Desert Sweep is postponed pending reassessment of intelligence security and enemy preparedness." The admission of failure tasted like ashes in his mouth, but continuing with compromised operations would result in unnecessary casualties among his own men while failing to achieve strategic objectives. The Apache warrior, who had taken his grandson, had somehow delivered information that saved his people from destruction, while condemning Harrison to professional disgrace. As search teams prepared for another day of futile pursuit, Harrison contemplated the personal and professional costs of his daughter's betrayal. Eleanor's misguided humanitarianism had not only cost her own life, but had potentially doomed his military career and left her son in the hands of Apache savages who might kill the boy out of spite or desperation. The bloodhound collar remained crumpled in his fist as he watched the desert horizon for signs that would never come. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, his grandson's fate was being decided by forces beyond his control, while his own future crumbled under the weight of choices made by people who valued Apache lives more than military success or family loyalty. The morning sun climbed higher over the search camp, its heat promising another day of scorching temperatures and diminishing water supplies. Harrison knew that time was running out for both his grandson's survival and his own chances of salvaging anything from the disaster that his family's divided loyalties had created in the harsh landscape of Arizona Territory.